Tape Series 346A. This is an interview with Ernie Swift. The interview was conducted on November 23, 1964, by Dennis East for the State Historical Society of Wisconsin. Tape 1, Side 1.
This is Dennis East of the State Historical Society. Today is November 23rd. I'm in Rice Lake, Wisconsin, to interview Mr. Ernie Swift, who was former director of the Wisconsin Conservation Department and also director of the National Wildlife Federation for a time, if I remember correctly.
And I was assistant director of the Fish and Wildlife Service Department of Interior.
Very good.
But that wasn't too long either.
Now, Mr. Swift, we'll start off here a little bit. I'm trying to get some early background or biographical information here. Could you tell us where you were born, when, your parents, and things such as this that might be of some relevance?
Well, I was born in southwestern Minnesota, the town of Tracy, about 30 miles from the South Dakota line and about 40 from the Iowa, in September of 1897. My father was the school superintendent at that place. And we had a little farm there at the edge of town in addition to his school teaching. And the country in that day still wasn't all plowed up. And one of the things that I remember that I've always valued is the vast number of migratory waterfowl that came down through that country. That was one of the great flyways of the Midwest, and also the prairie chicken, which today there are none there. I can also remember when I left, they had started to drain that country, and of course that had an impact on the migratory waterfowl populations as it has through the Dakotas and other parts of Minnesota. In 1913, my father got the idea that he wanted to buy a farm in northern Wisconsin, and he purchased a place that year out of Hayward, 9 miles east of Hayward at Round Lake. And to start with, I was up there in the summertime, and I graduated from high school at Tracy in 1916. And that winter my mother died, and my sister and I, we were on this stump farm alone. We built the buildings and cleared the land and did all those things that go with pioneer farming in those days. In 1917, I joined the Army for the First World War. I didn't get across. I came back in 1919, and we had a bad depression at that time. My father became very sick. We lost the farm. I went guiding in that country. In fact, I was doing a little guiding before we left the farm. But in fact, I worked in the woods, in the logging camps a couple winters. It was common in those days. In fact, you had to go to the woods to make enough money to pay the taxes to support the farm. That was about the type of farming effort it was. But there was much of that country up on the east and west fork of the Chipway that was still virgin timber. Most of the pine had been cut out. But I got into that country just at the end, you might say, of the pine era. The atmosphere was still there. Hayward was a mill town in those days. That was the main industry. There were practically no resorts. Some of the old so-called stopping places where lumberjacks lumberjacks used to stop, and tote teams took in a few summer fishermen and fall hunters. I don't think there were 6 resorts in the whole county that time. But I saw that atmosphere, I lived in it, but at the same time it began to change very rapidly, especially after the First World War. And people began to come into that country as tourists, and the tourist business began to expand very rapidly. And I guided from 22 to 25, and I happened to see a notice one day that they were giving examinations for conservation wardens. And I took it. I had no political friends or anything else. I've often heard, how it takes pull and everything to get onto those lists, but nevertheless I stood high on the list. H.W. Mackenzie was chief warden then, and in the spring of 26, in fact 1st of June of 26, I was sent over to Leona in Forest County as a warden. That was strictly a Kentucky country, if you know what that means.
No, you have to explain that a little bit, I'm afraid.
Well, a great many of the people in Langlade County, and especially in Forest County, I forgot that you didn't know this country. Back in the 1900s, they'd started to migrate up in there from the Kentucky mountains. All for several reasons. One, it was still very isolated. There was opportunities to work in the logging camps. But some of the first, when you asked them about why they came up there, well, they'd tell you that they'd gotten themselves a man down in Kentucky, which meant they'd kill somebody. So they came up into Forest County and brought their stills along with them. That was their standard means of support. And between a little farming and moonshining, and they were great believers in living off the land, killing deer all the year round, and anything. One of their means of money was picking ginseng. That was a great business over there in those days. And so I went over into this country where a game warden was just one cut above a revenue. He was about the lowest form of animal life that there was. I never had any training in law enforcement. I wasn't given any. I was just given a credentials and a badge and book of laws. I had passed the examination, but there were a lot of things in the examination at that time that didn't refer to actually on what you were going to do. Today, why they have in-service training and prior training, wardens, young wardens work with older wardens for several months off and on, and they continue this in-service training that I just learned mine the hard way without getting in jail or getting shot. But at that time they were starting fire protection over there. And in 27 I was, or the fall of 26, I was transferred into fire protection to help organize that. Fire protection over there at that time wasn't any more popular than game was. And at that time I was working under Harrington. And it was a case of putting up fire towers and finding people that would become summer fire wardens, trying to enforce the permit law for building fires. And I recall an old Kentuck telling me that he said, you state fellas are going to make anarchists out of us, trying to tell us we can't set the woods afire when we wanted to. And that was just about as popular as it was. Well, after I'd served a year as a district ranger over there, why, Mackenzie wanted me back, and I was transferred back to Hayward in my old hometown. In one sense, that's a mistake. In another, why, it was a pretty good schooling because it, well, it's harsh in the fact that you go back among people you've known. At the same time, I was fortunate, if I was going to go into enforcement, that I knew the North pretty well, the people and their philosophies. Because although the legislature passed laws that are applicable and supposedly the same in 71 or 72 counties today, they're only enforceable if people want them in the county. And you can only go that far. And you've got to understand that even though it irks you. That doesn't mean that you have to be a milquetoast, but at the same time, you're just not going to get any place. Game laws that wardens in southern Wisconsin could enforce and people accepted in the north, whether it was Sawyer County or all the way across the state, they just wouldn't tolerate that kind of strict enforcement. There were certain types of things when it came to commercialization that they objected to, but there was still this old deal that settlers ought to be able to live off the land to a certain degree, and there was a lot of sympathy for them.
Sympathy in what form? I mean,
the citizenry had sympathy. The courts had sympathy for them. The judges. You see, how a judge reacts in court is a reflection of what people think. And if he's too severe, or the district attorney's too severe, and they don't, and I think he is, he just isn't judged very long, or isn't district attorney very long. And regardless of how strict a warden or an enforcement officer might be, if he goes to those courts, he just don't get any place.
A district attorney who was not agreeable to follow the wishes of the people was about as popular as a game warden, huh?
That's right. I remember I'd been there about 9 months, and old J.C. Davis was district attorney. I was up there on a case one day, and we talked it over, and after I got through, he said, I want to talk to you, young fellow. So I sat down again. He said, I've been watching your law enforcement activities here in the county for the last 9-10 months. He said, I just want to tell you that someday you're going to, if you keep at it the way you are, you're going to be arresting some of Sawyer County's finest citizens. And you're going to come up here and ask me to prosecute them. And I don't think I'm about to do it.
Well, given this kind of attitude, how do you combat it? How do you overcome it?
Well, you have to work like hell. You have to pick those people, and this is a case in a sense. You have to not pick them, concentrate. You have to concentrate on those that have a reputation of more or less lawlessness, commercialization, and total disregard. You see what I'm getting at?
Mm-hmm.
And if you could catch those, the rest of the lesser, those that didn't violate so much, would begin to have respect for you, you see? But on the other hand, if you just started to pick up kids putting a few traps in out of season, and you never caught one of these recognized commercializers, you just weren't going to get any. It isn't a case of not getting any place altogether. You've got to have people have got to have respect for you. You see what I mean?
Right.
Now there was a young fellow that I had known before I left there. His name was Oscar Johnson. Oscar's dead now. And he was probably one of the smartest trappers that I ever knew. And Oscar would make $2,500 to $3,000 a year trapping illegally. And he was a hero around that town. His brothers were bootleggers, whiskey bootleggers. Mm-hmm. And most of the good citizens hobnobbed with him. You know, the line of demarcation in a town like that is awful thin. Well, I could see that I had to get Oscar. There weren't too many people, even though they, nice to the Johnson boys, secretly they wanted him taken. There's a lot of that kind of attitude too.
Sure. Right.
Well, actually, I worked the whole year on Oscar, and I got him. And of course, he thought it was an accident. But in that year, I had learned how he operated. In fact, if I saw traps up in Bayfield County, 50, 60 miles from that Hayward country, and they were set in a certain way, I could tell you that Oscar Johnson set those traps.
I was going to ask you,
I knew him that well, do you see?
I was going to say, how do you track a man along this line? I mean,
Well, all of those fellows had their trademarks in a sense, you know what I'm getting at, the way they operated. And you had to make a business of understanding all of the tricks of the trade. Well, as I say, I caught Oscar, and he thought it was an accident. But I caught him 3 times the next year, and he couldn't figure it out because I had learned how he operated, but it never occurred to him that I had devoted that much time and energy on it. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And in fact, I caught him 5 times, and the year after that I caught him. I took his car away from him, and he finally left the country for a while. But during this time, this beaver business had been building up.
It's the early 30s or late 20s or roughly?
Well, to go back a little, of course the beaver had been trapped out badly before there'd been any laws. And in the early 1900s, they were terrifically scarce. And then about right after the First World War, there began to, in some of the outlying wilderness areas of northern Wisconsin, there began to build up some pretty fair populations of beaver. But those were areas where you had to walk into for a day or two to find them. And the average person wasn't just doing that unless he was in a lumber cruiser or specifically in that business. And by the 20s, there was bigger populations than most people thought. They opened the season for 1 year and then they closed it. But beaver at that time, from then on, began to be a bootleg article, strictly because of the money value. You take a trapper, would get a good-sized beaver, blanket, they called them, and the fellow, the fur buyer that he sold to would probably get him around $20, $25 for that hide. But the buyer would get probably 40 or 45. And by the time that illegal hide got into New York or St. Louis, it would probably be worth $75. Mm-hmm. So everybody along the line within their own realm of influence was making money. And the fur buyer was putting pressure on these trappers to trap illegal beaver. Then, along with that, we had prohibition, the Volstead Act. And of course, the bootlegger, he'd gotten pretty well organized with his lawyers and everything out of Chicago. He had all those gangster wars and all of that. Well, it wasn't long before these gangsters were sending up emissaries, and they'd bring up bootleg whiskey. They'd either sell or trade it for beaver hides. And the alcohol and whiskey didn't cost them much. And if they sold it to a speakeasy up here, well, he could see a profit a big profit in the whiskey. And he'd be getting his hides at a reasonable price from local trappers. So he got whiskey that he made quite a profit off of when he resold it over the bar. And when these gangsters would take these furs back to these Chicago houses like Silverman and Becker and some of those, well, they had a payload both ways that was extremely profitable. Now that was a pretty big operation in a sense, and yet I don't want you to have any idea that it included the whole idea of bootlegging in those days. That was just part of it. But this operation extended from Wisconsin clear into Montana and Utah and Canada, northern Minnesota.
So illicit beaver.
Oh, yes. And
where was it concentrated here in Wisconsin?
There wasn't any absolute concentration. Green Bay was quite a place for concentrating beaver. And there were fur buyers out of Eagle River, Park Falls, Hayward, Medford, Mellon, and Spooner. They were the buyers that picked up generally from the trapper. And they in turn would run that stuff south, or somebody would come up and buy from them. But there was one fellow in Spooner named Tony Sabelski that I chased Tony around so much that I put him out of business. It wasn't always a case of, of conviction, which I did several times. But if you push them hard enough, they can't concentrate on their business, you see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he told me that before I came over there as warden one spring, he took $10,000 worth of beaver down Highway 13. And I believe him. Just one fur buyer.
Wow.
That was an activity that went on undercover, you might say. A lot of citizens didn't know too much about it. It didn't have any relation to some fella going out and killing a deer for himself once in a while, or spearing a fish, or this and that. You see, this was strictly a money deal. On the other hand, all these whiskey bootleggers, they had developed to the point of where they had lawyers as retainers, so that when the fur business got involved in it, the same lawyer defended the fur buyer. And there was a lot of other factors to it. You get one trapper, and you knew who he was selling to. The fur buyer might even be advancing him money. But at the same time, it was almost impossible to connect him with a ring, which he was. And so you took him into court, and he was just a poor, misguided guy from out in the bush. Do you see what I mean? And right away, he had some kids, and the sympathy was all with him. Don't you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Right. He was a part of a ring, but he didn't know it. Or at least he claimed not.
He claimed not. That's the
right,
point.
Right.
Now, when I went back to Hayward, I don't know whether I'm rambling too much or not.
No, go on, that's fine.
When I went back to Hayward, the Indian school was running, and they had a Indian agent there by the name of Ryder. And having lived there, I lived on the reservation once, and next to it I knew there was an ungodly lot of fur illegal fur going off the reservation. Not that it was all being caught there, but you see, the Indian could have it legally on the reservation. That was one of his treaty rights. But I knew damn well that a lot of these fur buyers were using him as a middleman. You see, I would go down to reserve to an Indian village there once or twice a month, and I would legalize their fur, tag it, so that could go any place, regardless of what the season was. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Right.
But these fur buyers, they would bring beaver in, or rats, and they would get the Indian to sign an affidavit that he caught. That's what I had to have, was the affidavit from the Indian, and then I would legalize it. And I knew a lot of this damn stuff. The Indian wasn't catching it, you know. I had friends on the reservation, too.
Yeah.
Well, when I got back to Hayward, I knew all of this was going on when I was over in Forest County. But when I got back to Hayward, there was an ungodly lot of fur going through that school up there where the Indian agent, he was a white man, his name was Ryder, had his office. So another warden and I, we started John Doe proceedings.
Who was that other warden?
Oh, Ike Boomer.
Ike Boomer.
Yeah.
I've heard the name. Right?
Yeah, it was Ike Boomer. We started the John Doe proceedings, and we'd get these Indians in and ask them in the court about these affidavits. You see, we got the affidavits from the Indian agent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can't remember all of it. But here was one, for example, that I remember very well. One Indian signed an affidavit that he had trapped 8 otter that winter. And he said he'd never trapped an otter in his life. In other words, he didn't know what the affidavit said. He couldn't read or write. So after we got all of this testimony, we went up there and we seized off the federal lands of federal reservation up there, $2,500 worth of beaver. And old Ryder, he just raised hell. He was going to have us in Leavenworth and everything else.
I was going to ask you, was that legal to go on the federal reservation like that, or how did?
Well, that's what he said it wasn't, but here's the point. I'm going to get to that. Of course, immediately he got the United States District Attorney from Wisconsin involved in that. I can't remember what his name was. But we went to Madison and we submitted all our John Doe evidence, and he wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And he wouldn't answer the question of whether
you had the right to go in there or not.
Whether we had the right. Well, later on, over some crooked land deals where Ryder went to prison, I think maybe that started the damn thing. But so far as that beaver business, it was for a warden. And we were alone those days. You know, we always worked alone practically, except on special occasions like that. It was mostly walking. The roads weren't plowed out. You didn't have a radio or a damn thing. But it was a very fascinating type of operation, because you were dealing with fellows that were doggone cunning. Not the trappers so much. Some of them were cunning, but when you got to the fur buyer class,
These would be just local citizenry, would they be?
Yeah, they'd be established.
They had connections down in Chicago or down farther.
That's exactly right.
And they ran it for the buck.
That's absolutely for the buck. Now, Tony Sabelski, he bootlegged a lot of this whiskey for those fellows that came up, but nevertheless, his main job was fur bootlegging.
Mm-hmm. Well, such agencies, for example, as the FBI or somebody like that, would probably know about the illegal booze. Was there any attempt to link the wardens up with the FBI and trying to crack down on the whole ring?
Not at that time there wasn't. Since then, there's been an organization. Well, of course, the FBI, 15 years ago, they started to come into these states and, or more than that, and give schools to develop a relationship. Now, this is confidential, but you take the Internal Revenue. They worked very close with the warden today, but in my day it was an unknown. I didn't even know who an Internal Revenue man was, any of them. But all of that over a period of time through experience and everything, and communications is one of them. And, Internal Revenue has a state office here. They got a federal office, I think, in Eau Claire. And there wasn't such a thing in my day as those kind of officers around. You see what I mean? Yeah. And furthermore, game law violation was a very mild form of thing to most people. Unless it was pretty bad, they were quite sympathetic with the guy that got caught.
How was this illegal beaver ring more or less cracked, or you have little ideas on that maybe?
For about 1930 or so, we tried to tell Mackenzie that the best thing to do was to open the season, because there were so damn many beaver with the limited restrictions, and give the honest trapper a chance. And he just wouldn't believe us that there were that many beaver. And it got so that the honest trapper went crooked, or if he did stay honest, he was damned if he was going to. He was so mad, that he wouldn't give you any cooperation.
Tape Series 346A. Interview with Ernie Swift continued. Tape 1, Side 2.
When I turned the tape over there, Mr. Swift, you were talking about trying to convince the director, Warden Mackenzie, Chief Warden Mackenzie, how to best thwart this illegal beaver trade.
Well, I've talked with I mentioned this Oscar Johnson, and I saw some information that Knutson had put on about beaver. Frankly, I don't think it's very accurate, because within my own knowledge there was many things in it that were inaccurate. And he tells about when the beaver hit their high population, and about the state taking action on complaints of flooding and everything. And I set the date of 1935 as the peak of or 34 in there, when the beaver were at their height, because about 1935, I think, we opened the season. I went up and talked to Oscar Johnson on that here a couple of years ago. We're friends.
You mentioned he died since then.
Yeah.
Well,
we always had a mutual respect for him, for each other, although we were on different sides of the fence. But I went up and asked Oscar, I said, when did the beaver hit their peak? He said, just before the season was over, and they were going down, Ernie. I said, by God, that's just exactly what I think, Oscar. I don't care whether he was an outlaw or not. I knew from the standpoint of something like that, his opinion was valid as far as I was concerned.
In other words, your early efforts to convince Mackenzie or the department to make open season on the beaver.
Yeah.
were more or less thwarted or deterred until 1935 or so.
I want you to understand this too, or as a matter of record. It wasn't only Swift that tried to tell him that. There's a god-awful lot of field wardens that tried to tell him this. I was just one of them.
Right.
Quite a few fellows that collectively and individually in their own field work had come to the conclusion that it was a losing game. Another thing, complaints of flooding and damage to timber and all that was getting so damn bad that if a fellow went and trapped beaver out of season where he had, where the beaver had flooded 200 or 300 or 400 acres of highly valuable cedar, then you went and talked to the landowner, he'd just laugh at you. He wanted to get rid of the damn thing. Why the hell should he complain against anybody that'd take him out? State wouldn't do it, don't you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So you get all of those personal factors in there. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got their own ox to gore, you know.
Right. Right. Well, until they did make it open season, you were still faced with the same problem for a number of years up here of illegal trapping and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that started in the early 20s and increased up until end of the 30s. And during the Depression, it was just hell. And then you couldn't convict many people because they were desperate. Mm-hmm. And there was guys that never thought of violating, went out and killed deer and trapped beaver to get what they could, and by God, you just didn't have the heart to do much because...
Did these people now, you mentioned earlier when you first started in 26, 27 or so, you mentioned that in law enforcement in general, you had trouble with the citizenry or with public sentiment was in favor.
Let's say it was very passive to the...
Passive, all right. Well, when this illegal beaver trade got linked up with illegal booze and kind of got organized, was there more of opposition to this by the citizenry and the district attorneys and judges at this time, or was it still this passive attitude?
In the first place, the average citizen that had a shop on the streets of town didn't know too much about that because it was undercover. Mm-hmm. I would say that a good many of your district attorneys and judges, when they did find out what this thing was about after you could explain it, it wasn't altogether of explanation, it was experience of cases that you brought in. They were pretty good about clobbering these fellows.
So your percentage of winning cases on this matter was pretty high.
Pretty good. You see here, that fur was out there. Here's where the biggest fine was. If a fur buyer had invested $400 or $500 in fur, and you got him with it, and he was only fined $50 even, he lost $500 worth of fur. That was where the hurt came, you see.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hit him in the pocketbook worse there than the actual.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because that was considered state property. There wasn't any argument about it, you know. It was illegal and therefore state property. Maybe we've talked enough long on that subject.
I was going to ask you something in regards, what was more or less the attitude of the department, conservation department during this time? Were they giving you all the help they could, or do you feel that they're helping?
Oh, they were giving us all the help they could. You'd have to check this. But when I started in 26, I don't think there was much over 36 full-time wardens. Some of the southern wardens were only working part-time. They were called regular personnel, but they didn't work the year-round. Mm-hmm. But when McKenzie became chief warden, and he was very aggressive, and he was a damn good chief warden, he doubled that in almost 3 years just like Lord would do.
Yeah, right. Well, I've often
a lot of wardens were working 2 counties in those days, you know.
Mm-hmm. Was there any, during this period, this illegal beaver trade, was there any linkage of any wardens themselves with any of these operations? Assisting in this?
I'm unsatisfied that John Long was linked up in that in a big way. Very satisfied.
I mean, as a matter, I mean, no doubt there'll probably be some speculation that certain wardens might have been linked up on it, but I mean, to your recollection, there was never an issue brought before the commission where a man was ousted or a warden was ousted.
Well, of course, this man Stabno that I arrested on that case of maybe Art Johnson mentioned, he was a warden. I've got the distinction of being the only guy that ever arrested a fellow warden and convicting him and making it stick.
Was this a fellow that you more or less tracked and camped out at night and so on? Mr. Johnson, who I interviewed earlier, didn't mention the name. He couldn't recall the name of the man. He remembered that where you'd come up and spent several days or weeks or whatever it was tracking this guy. And
you see, here's what I did. I found out they were trapping in that country and I didn't know who it was, although I suspicioned one fellow that had a fur farm there. Maybe this would be of a little interest. You see, this fur farm is in John Long's
bailiwick
county, Ashland. And that didn't exclude me from going in there, but it wasn't one of those things I would have aggressively. I mean, if it had been my own county, I'd have probably gone there quicker, you see what I mean? But I just hadn't. And furthermore, I'd only been here about, let me see, I came back in the winter of 28 and this was 30. And I'd been kept pretty damn busy doing a lot of things otherwise. But Mackenzie called me up one day and he said that I want to know if I knew the Hubing Fur Farm. And I said, well, I know of it. It's up on Moose River. It's up in Ashland County. He said, how big is it? I said, I don't know. I've never been there. I said, that's John Long's territory. Well, Mac knew goddamn well whose territory it was. Well, you see, in those days, when a beaver farmer, it was a legalized operation. When a beaver farmer wanted tags for the beaver that he supposedly took off his property, he applied to the local warden. The local warden wrote the department. The department sent the tags back. And then the warden was to go out there and personally tag them. Well, John Long, up to the time Mac called me, had applied for 180 tags on a 10-acre farm. Now, probably if you got 6 beaver off of 10 acres, you'd be just raising hell, young fella.
Yeah, uh-huh.
And then another request came in from John Long for 50 more tags, which made 230 tags. So that's when Mac called me. So I went up there. Or he came up, that's it, and he and I and Boomer went in there. And there wasn't anything we could find. We went around this 10 acres. Well, Mike says, take him into court. He said, you can't get 230 beaver off of 10 acres. Well, I knew that was a damn poor case. Awful poor. Mm-hmm. And I didn't like it. So I never said anything to Mac at all. I went up there and camped. I figured they were still trapping. And I thought that was this man Hubing. And I found some of their traps, and I laid by them. And 2 fellas came down, and I recognized this other warden, Stabno. Then I knew I had something. I had snapped their traps. I didn't arrest them. I didn't do a damn thing that day. Then I started to look for more traps, and my biggest job was to stay out of their sight. You see what I mean? And I found quite a few traps, and I'd snap them. And when they'd come and set them, I had the town, the section, the 40, and the range. I'd take the time of day, who they were, what kind of a day it was, what they did.
permanent record.
And I kept a 10-day diary on those guys. And the last, why, they had a beaver in one of their traps, and I took them. And Stabenow said, "You can't arrest me." And I said, "Why can't I?" And he said, "I got credentials like you've got. They're just as good as yours." And I said, "Today they're not going to do you a damn bit of good." So that case was tried in municipal court up there, and I won. And they appealed it. John Long testified for him.
Yeah. Like,
And then he testified in circuit court.
did he?
But the thing that won my case, I pulled out that diary in circuit court. And oh God, the defense attorney, he just
Cringed.
put on a act, you know. Well, I learned a lot on that case too, because old Judge Rich George turned around in his chair and he said, "Young man, when did you make that diary? Did you make it on the spot? Did you make it in your tent? Did you wait till you got back to Hayward?" I said, "I made it on the spot, Your Honor." He said, "It may be entered as evidence." This was 3 months after it happened, and they couldn't remember where the hell they were at 10 o'clock on such and such a day, and whether it was cloudy or
Sunny or what? Yeah, I don't know.
that one. That
Who prosecuted the case for you on that?
Arthur Johnson.
Art Johnson.
Yeah.
Was he one of the, you might say, one of the more helpful DAs that you
As
worked
far as
with?
I was concerned, he was one of the most helpful in that time, in that era. If I had a good sound case, I tried not to bring anything up. Art would take it, and he would do his damnedest to prosecute. I doubt if there's a case that Art ever lost for me.
No, he didn't mention any. He didn't when I talked with him the last time.
I don't think that Art Johnson ever lost a case.
In early 20s, late teens, you might say, the Conservation Department purchased a mess of motorcycles for their wardens. Did you ever get involved in one of them?
No,
Or do you have your own car? Or
That was just before I started.
that was before you started.
Yeah.
Now, I was kind of hoping you might have a story to tell about whipping around in the woods on a motorcycle.
They didn't last very long.
No, I don't think they were very.
The old warden up at Hayward had one, Cap Wismer. That's right, they did. They had motorcycles. When I started, like, you had to furnish your own car. I had a Model T. In the wintertime, we got $10 a month expense account.
For your automobile.
For every, well, hell, you couldn't drive the damn thing in the wintertime anyway.
No. Yeah. When you operated as warden, were you at a certain headquarters in town, or did you operate out of your home base at this time, or how
I
was
operated
it?
out of my home.
Out of your home at that time.
They hadn't established any headquarters yet in those days.
Did you think the force was adequate at that time, or you think you could always use more wardens? Huh?
You certainly could have in those days. See, there's about 130 now. And I would say that Mac doubled that in three years or so, pretty nearly.
And that's Mackenzie, you mean,
Mhm.
Mac. No. Wasn't it Art Johnson, last time I talked with him, he mentioned you got involved with a guy out of Chicago by the name of Saltus, Joe Saltus. Was this during this illegal beaver trade that we were talking about earlier?
He wasn't involved in that, but that was at the same time.
Would you care to give us a little recounting of what was involved there, if you can recall?
That's a long, long story.
Oh, we ought to hear it, I think, if you can recall
Just
it.
a minute. Oh.
Mr. Swift was telling us about this, was going to tell us about this incident with Mr. Saltus, or Saltus out of Chicago, I guess. But he tells me that a story was in True magazine in 1957 in regards to his encounter with these men. The article was written by Ken Smith and John Keats. Were these couple men you knew, or were they just
Smith had been with the Milwaukee Journal, and when I retired, or resigned rather, as director to go with the Fish and Wildlife Service, He had been looking through the journal and seen a lot of some of this stuff, you know, the journal, and he finally came to me and wanted to know if he could write it up. So he wrote some of it up. I recall some of it for him. And he sent it in to True, and they bought it. And then they had John Keats rewrite it and shorten it.
Well, what? Can you just give us briefly what was this involved with? I mean, was it over a beaver or fishing or what was it?
Well, Solis was a beer runner out of Chicago. I suppose these names won't mean anything to you or anybody much at this time, but such fellows as Machine Gun Frankie McErlin, who bragged he had invented a one-way ride, used to hang out up there. Potatoes Kaufman, Sammy Malaga, and Joe established a place up on Barker Lake, which is on the east fork of the Chipaway. And he personally came up there to start with when it got too hot in Chicago. He was involved in killing another gangster, and he's also involved in killing a policeman down there, of which he was found not guilty on both of those deals. They came at different times. But Joe thought this was pretty good country to enjoy himself, so he began fishing below the Winter Dam, which was a refuge. And that was his favorite fishing spot. And nobody bothered him, evidently, until I came back into the country from Forest County. And I know one instance, this is fact. He went down there and the fish would pocket below the dam in the spring. He went down there and caught 25 muskies one time. And then when these other guys would come up, why, they would headlight for deer and they'd machine gun them, you know, but they wouldn't even, sometimes they'd pick them up, sometimes they wouldn't. Just target practice. My wife at that time worked at the telephone office in Hayward. Joe would drive up to the telephone office to make a long distance, and she said many a time she's seen a machine gun sitting in the back of the
car.
On the back of the car there. So Fred Miner and I, we got Joe down there one time. He never made any bones about. But actually, the first time I went down there, and I ran into 3 of his hoods, and I got one of them into court. The others beat it back to Chicago. Then we got Joe. And then I got 2 of his men hunting partridge. Joe came into court drunk. He said not to bother him anymore because he'd shoot me on sight if he ever attempted to. So I talked it over with Mac. No, I sent in I talked it over with him on the phone, and he said send in a report. So, first thing I knew, I was down at Madison talking to Governor Cohen, not the junior, but his father was governor. So we organized a group of wardens and laid way to the dam, and we caught Joe and 5 or 6 other guys. Then I caught him once after that.
What did they do, just find him in court whenever they tried him like that?
Yeah, they just find him.
Yeah. He paid that off without any trouble, huh?
That's right. But he'd have big parties out there, and he'd have the sheriff and the district attorney and God knows who all, and I couldn't get any support out of them. But Governor Kohler really supported me. If you want to read that, why, that'll tell that.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, then in 33, why, Leif Stiro, when the fire season was terribly bad, Leif Stiro.
How you spell Stiro, you know?
S-T-I-E-R-O, Leif. Just like Leif Erikson.
Yeah. Go ahead, don't let me.
Well, he was district ranger over there, and the fire season was terribly bad. So he needed help the worst way, so I told him I'd just lay off of law enforcement and help him in the fire situation. Because in the fall, while Leif would just pitch in and help me, didn't need any memorandum to transfer or anything else like they do nowadays.
Then I was going to ask you about that. Just a matter of cooperating with the various divisions,
That's
right?
right.
You just go over and do it. It wasn't a matter of formal improvement.
That's right. We just went and did what was most important. We did.
Yeah.
There's certain virtues of that too.
It would probably be well used again, even in this day and age, I think.
Damn right it would, my friend.
It would save a lot of problems.
Well, this was in September '33, and I'd been ramrodding a crew over on the Flambeau. They had a bad fire there. Principally, I would take in the equipment and grub, and they had a good foreman, and I'd look the situation over and come back and report to him, and such other jobs as he wanted. But this particular time, why, a bridge had gone out over there, and they needed some planking, so I was going to take it over, and he said, well, we'll go together, because he said, I haven't been over there for a month. He had many fires going. So we started out in the morning, and of course it's hard for you to visualize this, I suppose, but between the east and the west fork of the Chipway, there was a long stretch of road there, and about a mile ahead of us, you could see two cars coming because we were up on quite a high hill. And they stopped. One of them went up, parked along the side of the road, and the other one turned in. Leif says, I can't figure out where that car disappeared to. There's no roads in there. Well, of course, I was longer in the country than he was. And I said, yes, there's an old tote road there. But I said, they can't get very far because the bridge is out. There's a creek there. And I have to come back. I said, I don't want to stop you on your mission. I think they're hunting partridge. That was a close season. I said, I'm going in there, Leif. If they started to hunt and haven't got anything, I'm just going to tell them to get the hell out of there. If they haven't got anything, I'll pick their guns and tell them to appear in court. So we drove up, and we stopped, and I said, let's go back and talk to this fellow in the car. There was this one car there, and a lone man in it. I said, what's that car doing up this old road? Well, there wasn't any car up there. Yes, I said, I saw one go up there. Well, he didn't know. In the meantime, Leif, he'd looked through the window in the back seat to see if there's any guns, and there wasn't any. So we started in. Leif said he'll honk his horn, which he did. Well, I said that won't do him any good. We walked in there about 200 feet, and there was a little clearing, which I knew of, and the car was still on the road in this clearing. There was 3 men there, and they were getting something out of the car door was open. It was just a two-door car. And it seemed heavier than hell. I mean, the way they were tugging. And they brought it out, and we kept walking. They didn't see us, And I could see this thing. Oh, it was about so. And two of them were, and God, it seemed heavy, you know. And they walked off into the brush, and they still didn't see us. And I got right up here, and there was a fellow here, and he looked up, and he put his hand in, and I saw the flash of a gun, and I thought he was trying to hide it, but he sure as hell wasn't. He put it in my stomach, and I kind of stepped on Leif's feet. He wanted to know what we wanted. Right away I said, well, this is a bad fire season. We didn't want you to set any fires. And just as soon as that fellow stuck that gun in my guts, I knew what those fellows were carrying. It was the door of a safe. But, you know, it came so quick. Well, they were out there in this matter of a second, and this fellow in front of me, he pulled my hat down. He said, don't you guys try to look. And they took us over into the brush. They laid us down. They wanted to know who we were. We finally gave them their credentials, and you could hear them copying them off because they were, I don't think they were very well educated, but one fellow would say A or S and then W, and then they gave it back to me. And in the meantime, I could hear an activity with a shovel. But this fellow that held me up, he kept saying, what are we going to do with these sons of bitches? He said, the only thing we can do is kill them. And evidently, this, which I found out later, one of these fellows never been involved in killing much. He didn't want any part of that. And I kind of figured that they were burying this
safe.
This door. Actually, the safe was in the car yet, and they dragged that out. They buried the whole business. What was a safe about that? It weighed 400 pounds, to be frank with you. Well, they buried the safe. We laid there about a half an hour, and they argued over what they were going to do with us. And this fellow didn't want any killing. Finally, this fellow's name was Dingman, Elmer Dingman. I found that out later. He said, if you guys will promise not to tell anybody what you saw here, we'll let you go. But he said, if you ever do, we'll come back and kill you. I said, all right. You promise anything at that time, you know. Well, he said, we're going to leave. And he said, you lay here 5 minutes. So we heard the car back out. We were laying right close together. Leif said, let's get up and run. I said, you damn fool, there's a man back of us yet. I said, don't you make him move a muscle. Must have been 2 or 3 minutes. We finally heard this guy walking down in the leaves. I said, see, I told you, Leif. That guy would have plugged us. Mm-hmm. Now I said, wait until you hear the car. 2 cars gun out on the road. So we heard one car gun, and a minute later the other one. Now I said, we'll run like hell. And we jumped up and hit the bush. We circled around, we came back up to the road. We were below our truck. And we went up there and they'd rifled the truck. I mean the glove compartment. And we had jackets and they'd turned the pockets inside out and everything. Well, I said, Leif, what are we going to do now? Well, he said, I'll tell you what we're going to do. He said, I got payment on my insurance policy in my pocket, which I never mailed, and the first damn thing I'm going back to Hayward and mail it.
Oh, were these guys gangsters or something? They held up a bank or a store?
So we drove back to Hayward, and while Leif went over to the post office to get his money order, I dropped into a little candy store there and bought a St. Paul Dispatch. And here on the headlines, $80,000 express robbery, South St. Paul. So when Leif come out, I said, well, here's our boys. So we went over and told J.C. Davis. He called the
sheriff?
No, he was the district attorney. And he called the St. Paul police.
Tape Series 346A. Interview with Ernie Swift. Continued. Tape 2, Side 1.
Okay, you mentioned you'd just gone over to talk to J.C. Davis.
Well, we told him we were going back to fire, where we were going. So we went over to the headquarters, and I told one of the older rangers briefly what had happened. We didn't enlarge on it. And I told him where the old Eastport Tote Road, and he knew all about where that road was. So when we came back that night, why, here was 7 or 8 St. Paul Dicks. And these fellows, there had been 8 of them, and they had hijacked 2 Railway Express safes at South St. Paul, and they had split. They had 2 cars. They had been able to open one, and they dumped it out of St. Paul, and then these 4, they came back up to Hayward. And they'd been staying out to Round Lake all summer, these guys had. And they had to use TNT on that one. And of course they'd blown the doorway off. And that was the one that had most of the money in it. Well, one old guy kept telling us how lucky we were, and I told him I kind of thought that myself. So, I called up Mackenzie. Told him about this. And Ralph Himmel was acting director at that time. And he went in and told Ralph Himmel. And Ralph Himmel called up Purvis, FBI at Chicago, the guy that shot Dillinger. Mm-hmm. And he says, you get those men and our families out of Hayward. So they put us down there to Madison, out at the Mendota Insane Asylum in the doctor's quarters. And we were there for 3 months. And in October, one Sunday morning, an old Packard drove into Hayward about 10 o'clock. And it stopped at Gus Carbolis's pool hall. The top was gone. You remember them old Packards?
Yeah, see them.
A couple of guys walked in and looked around, and there was a fellow running the place there. And there was an Indian with the name of Taylor. He was sitting in one of those old high chairs they used to have in the pool hall. They walked over to him, and they said, do you know a fellow by the name of Ernie Swift? Taylor said, sure. He said, I cracked woes, and he bounded my woes for me. Well, would you be kind enough to show us where he lives? Sure, Taylor said, I'll do that. So they walked out to the car, and as they opened the back rear door of the car, well, Taylor said that there was a machine gun, a shotgun, and a rifle, and, I don't know, 2 or 3 pistols. And of course he backed up, and they gave him a hell of a show. And they got in on each side of him. There wasn't a damn soul on the streets, you know. Mm-hmm. They stuck a gun in his guts, and they said, now you show us where Swift lives. So they drove up to my place. They said, now you go and knock at the front door, and then you get the hell out of there. Well, I wasn't home. Thank God. That was due to Purvis and Himmel. Mm-hmm. So they took this Indian way down south here, kidnapped him, and then kicked him off about halfway down the state. He had to hitchhike his way back. I knew him very well, and he told me this, and it sounded so damn fantastic. But he told me where he was kicked off, and there was a filling station. I went down, and one of the rangers knew the fella. Just stopped in, not to make it obvious, and he passed the time of day with his filling operator. And he said, we were looking for an Indian, and we heard he was down through here a while back. Well, by God, yes, he said. He claimed that somebody had kidnapped him, he said. I mean, I wanted to check on this story.
Yeah. Make sure it was true.
Make sure it was true. Well, in January there was a gem jewelry hold up in Omaha, Nebraska, and in rounding up a lot of these people, they rounded up this man Dingman, another fellow by the name of Oxley. They rounded up 3 fellows that had been involved in this thing.
St. Paul.
But they weren't involved in the gem robbery. But they had machine guns. So I went down there at the trial and identified them, and they got 2 years in Nebraska. Well, just a month before we had got involved in this, there had been a robbery at the brewery at Marshfield. The chief of police, his name is Beale, had been shot. And by God, it was this man Dingman that held the gun on me that had killed Beale. And they brought Dingman and I forget what the other fellow's name was. And Dingman got life, and the other fellow got 25 years for the killing of John Beale there at Marshfield. So that son of a gun, he didn't have... I mean, he was wanted for murder anyway, and 1 or 2 more. At the time that they argued, wouldn't have made any...
Wouldn't make any difference.
Made any difference.
Yeah. Well, these guys were, I mean, all the men that you were involved with up there were eventually caught.
Yeah, that's right.
They were taken care of.
I have a little pride in that one aspect of that, though, if I may get a little egotistical.
Please do.
You listen to radio and police ask the man's description, and I gave him this man Dingman's description. He had his hat off, which was a heck of an advantage. I missed his height by 1/2 inch. I missed his weight by 5 pounds. I missed his age by 4 years or 5 years. And I said he was a snowbird. In other words, he took care of me because he was white around here and his eyes were just pimply. And as I say, I got him that close. And he was a snowbird.
Yeah. Usually you can't come that close. They never do. They never do. They're always off by about 50 pounds.
That's
and
right.
about 10 inches, No, that's
so that
amazing.
kind of wound up my gangster career, my misspent life.
The misspent life. I don't believe so. That's what I was going
In
to say.
fact, I'm the first one that ever officially reported deer starvation.
Deer starvation.
Back in 1930, on wintering grounds.
That was public grounds, you mean? Wintering grounds? Or
Yeah, there you see deer yard up in the winter when the snow is deep especially.
Yeah.
And if there isn't enough food there, well, they just starve to death. And although I wasn't the first one that ever ran on anything like that, nobody ever had any curiosity.
Why does it, what you mean why this comes about, or
Yeah.
what causes it?
Well,
This led to a little
you
more
see-
research on it, maybe.
That's right. You see, we've found out since that in a snow winter, that's what we call it. There are winters, when deer can run around. But in a snow winter, 2 feet or more, the deer in the northern third of the county yard in about 10% of the land area. And if there isn't enough food in that yard, that's just the nature of the beast. They'll starve to death before they will strike out and find anything. After they have once actually yarded up, they'll have trails and everything else in there, but they just won't buck the snow. And of course it's usually the strongest that survive because they chase the fawns away, and it's usually fawns that you'll find dead.
But as a result of this, nobody ever reported this or made any...
No, that doesn't mean
observation.
that I was the first one that ever saw it, but I was the first one that ever officially reported it.
Well, as a
And my
result of...
curiosity Yeah, shortly after that. As soon as I got down there, we hired a game biologist, Bill Feeney, to major on deer herd management.
Well, getting back here a little bit, you say you were involved in game management. In 1928, the Division of Game Management was established at the Conservation Department, so it was kind of a relatively new thing.
Yeah, I think Wally Grange started it.
Primarily, in its early operations, I think, wasn't it primarily concerned with stocking and propagation?
That's right, yeah.
And then as time went on, they got into research and refuges and cooperative game management, things like that.
You see, young fellow in 28, a game management school was only a gleam in people's eye.
Wasn't Wisconsin one of the first to establish this?
There were states that had biology classes and things of that kind, and pathology that would kind of angle off into a little of that, because the instructor, an individual instructor, had curiosity. But Wisconsin in 1933 was the first that officially, or had an official game management school devoted to that purpose. It was chaired by Aldo Leopold.
You knew Mr. Leopold
very, very well. You know.
What?
Here's something I'm halfway proud of.
I just said I didn't have it going.
Well, as I say, I got some criticism from some of my fellow wardens because they thought our job was entirely that of being a brush cop. And that, I don't mean to imply that I was any smarter than any of the rest of them. In fact, I don't think I was as smart as some of them. But nevertheless, I had a curiosity about anything I saw in the woods, and I was never satisfied until I could arrive at least some conclusion of, if it was, I mean, an abnormal thing, like deer starvation is an abnormal thing.
Right. You're kind of like Aldo Leopold. He was kind of aware, from what I've read of him and heard people talk, he had a kind of a curiosity along that way. He just had to have it satisfied.
You go out with him and he'd stretch your brains until they were all tired out in a matter of one day. And he wasn't upstage about it. I mean, he'd say, well, now, what do you think about that? What happened? And it wasn't a leading question. I mean, he wasn't trying to show any superiority. He'd say, I don't know either.
I'm trying to find out.
I can remember, I'm getting way off base, but I can remember one time coming out of, you see, he was on the commission.
Right.
Coming out of Madison and getting up close to, what's that town north of there? It's on the old road anyway. Anyway, we came down a big hill. And on the right of it, there was a steep drop-off. And there was quite a patch of timber there, second growth. It's nice, healthy stuff. But in the middle of it was a great big oak tree. God, it was that big around. What we call a wolf tree, you know. And he said, stop the car. And I go over, stop the car, and he sat there. He said, what happened here? And he said, how did that wolf tree happen to be here and all that young second growth? Oh, he must have sat there 30 minutes while he ruminated on whether the Indians had left it or whether the settler had left it, and he chewed on that, by God, for an hour afterwards. But that was
the nature of the man.
That was the nature of the man.
Right.
And I honestly think my association, I think I had some curiosity, but I think I was sharp and it rubbed off just by being with that man, because, see, I met him in 28, and 28 when he was getting all the background for that book. And you just couldn't help but, if you had any native curiosity yourself, to be pushed ahead by the type of thing that he would... I had gone by that patch of woods maybe 1,000 times, I don't know, but a lot of them. And here we go down there together, and he wants to know why that big tree's in there.
Yeah. No, I've heard that he was that way, that he just, even the most commonplace thing, if he didn't understand it, he had to try to figure it out.
That's right. That's exactly.
I've heard other people say that he's pretty much of a, of course he was, but that he was too much of a theorist, that he didn't deal enough in the practicality of conservation in the state.
He filled a terrific niche. I'll tell you why. There's all kinds of technicians in forestry and game management, but damn few of them interpret their technical knowledge along with any philosophy. And he had philosophy and a background of technical knowledge. And you've got to have some philosophy if you're going to apply technology to this business. And I'll admit that he didn't understand human beings, but he understood a heck of a lot about everything else
What do you mean?
in nature.
What do you mean he didn't understand?
He was always being disappointed by human beings for this reason. They knew who Oliver Leopold was, and they would try to make an effort to impress him, and something that he might have an interest in, they would talk along, and he would take that as complete sincerity, and lots of times it was just trying to make an impression, And then afterwards, something would happen where he'd be terribly disappointed in this person. It never even occurred to him that they were pulling his leg. Don't you see what I mean?
Yeah, right.
But he was quite a noted person, so they wanted to make an impression on him. That's what I mean when he didn't understand human beings. He couldn't understand any human guile.
Yeah, I think I follow you now. You mentioned that you were active, or more or less interested in game management. Just exactly what were your duties, or what did you do in this area in your early days as a warden, 27, 28, in that time?
Well, of course, in those days, the state didn't have any lands to speak of their own as far as game management. And by and large, it was censusing game from the standpoint of potential regulations. And after I discovered that deer starvation, we began to make a detailed survey of deer yards, whether that was common and whether that was an isolated case. And it was a gathering of facts of what was occurring on the land and with the game more than habitat improvement. We haven't gotten that far yet. And hell, a lot of game techniques that have been developed since. They were just in the crude beginning then, Actually, a lot of the techniques of survey might have been suggested then, but those fellows that were interested in that type of thing, they had no common standard. Everybody kind of set his own standard, and then there was no basis of comparison.
Right.
Actually, you see, from my standpoint of view, young fella, game management is awful young.
Yeah, it is.
You see, I had been in the department 7 or 8 years before there was even a game management school.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Now, a fellow that graduates today from one of these schools, they think they're hoary with age.
Yeah, that's right.
But your forestry schools were only about 1900 was when they were really first established as a recognized forestry school, like Yale and Cornell and some of those.
Well, it wasn't, we said this earlier, it was primarily stocking and propagation. When did the state start expanding into public hunting grounds and refuges and things like this?
Well, some of those things are cyclic. Let me take one thing at a time. Of course, the year that I moved to Madison, 35, they'd started a game farm. Mac's concept was that artificial propagation of fishing and birds would solve all problems. Now, at that time, you've got to remember this, in the matter of pheasants, even if they're artificially propagated. We had far more habitat in southern Wisconsin than we have today. I mean, more intensive farming, finer techniques in farming, and drainage has eliminated a lot of that. Mm-hmm. So, I never believed that in total that artificial propagation of anything was the answer. I always thought that they had to have habitat, but at the same time, I didn't quite realize that, like in the case of the pheasant, that it was going to disappear so darn fast either, you know. Now, you take in the case of deer, this country had been burning over for, pure hell since the 60s, some of it. And due to lack of law enforcement and bad and chronic fires, the deer herd wasn't generally too big. There were some areas that we had a heavy, healthy deer herd, like when I first started to hunt on the East Fork back in 1915. There was a god-awful lot of deer. But around our old farm, hell, there wasn't such a thing as a deer. And they were unheard of. But when we started fire protection, we started all of these young shoots coming up, you know, and which is ideal, and the deer herd grew along with them. Now there are certain areas, it isn't too noticeable, but there are already areas where the timber has grown to the point of where there's very little deer feed again. You see what I mean? So your deer herd's going to drop in those areas. So that was more or less the history of it. One thing that I feel sorry about is that the state never made any effort to preserve the sharp-tail country we had.
Sharp-tail grouse?
Yeah, because that's gone. You see, Mac was going to substitute the pheasant all over the state.
For grouse?
For grouse and all of that. Well, all we got now is put and take pheasant hunting, actually. And our grouse areas have diminished until it's just pathetic. And it isn't too late yet if they're taking aggressive...
What were there were members of the commission or in the department down there that wanted to do more grouse research?
Well, Graham started out on some grouse research, and we had a man by the name of Gross from
Maine. Alfred Gross. Yeah.
Oh, what school is he from? I forget.
Bodine
yeah.
College?
Yeah.
Bodine College?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
I got their report here.
All of Gross's research was practically eliminated more or less. And as far as, did you work with him on this in any way, or?
Not directly.
I think he was assisted by a guy by the name of Smith, wasn't he?
That's right. I used to work with Schmidt. Yeah. He died in the fire. I used to work a little with Schmidt, but just you want to remember locally. I mean, he would go around and see the various men. It was like a lot of other things. If they were interested, why, he'd get cooperation. If they weren't, he wouldn't. He'd work alone.
I was going to ask you, we talked a little bit about refuges there, and a little bit, when you think of a more general question, you might say, what do you think about the state owning extensive areas such as this with respect to forests and hunting grounds and sanctuaries and parks? Do you think this is a necessary and needed thing more so, or they didn't do it quick enough, or how much?
Well, when it comes to refuges, of course, originally most of our refuges were on private land with the consent of the owner.
Such as Grange's outfit,
well, you take a lot of your lumber companies, for example, they'd cooperate, you know, to close it. The state would close it by official order. But that was at the time that they thought the deer were going to be exterminated, and so many of these philosophies changed. We haven't got 1, 2, 3 of the refuges that we had 30 years ago. But there are such things as the Flambeau River and the Brule, and of course central Wisconsin there. That came along in the Depression. If some of these things are going to be saved, yes, in the public hunting ground, why, there's got to be some state ownership. And yet, I might say this, that when Nelson was promoting this cigarette tax, which I thought basically was a good idea, I tried to point out to him that he was going to run onto a lot of static. They made no provisions for taxing it. Now that galls some people. But you've got to remember that a town is trying to run a business. I mean a town board. And they got roads, and they got schools, and they got this and that to keep up. And when you tell them that recreation in 20 years will bring in as much revenue as you're taking off the tax roll today, they're not interested in that because they got to have a year-to-year budget. Well, last year and what I was trying to tell him was that before people get involved in this tax business, introduce, along with your bill, or put it in there, a reasonable tax that the state will pay. And then you can point to that. We are paying taxes. So, but he wouldn't do that. So last winter, the legislature passed a law that the state has to pay 30 cents an acre on everything they own except parks. Now this is what happens. You take up here in the town of Windsor where the Flambeau Forest is, the state is paying $12.40. And next to it, under the forest crop law, the private industry is paying $4.40 according to law. Now those people up there aren't going to say, gee, the state's paying us too much. They're going to say, geez, the industry isn't paying us enough. And there's a lot of stuff here that is less than $4.40. When you get down into the Kettle Moraine, and 30 cents an acre isn't enough. You see what I mean?
Right.
And I was talking to Les Voigt not very long ago, and he said, we're getting into the damnedest static that you ever saw in this tax business, Ernie. He said, we're getting resisted. Regardless of whether the money is there, it doesn't make any difference whether you've got the right of eminent domain. That's so complicated anyway. If the local town and county boards fight you, you just got to about give up of land buying. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I maintain, I'm not trying to tell you how smart I am, but I maintain if that had been a good, equitable tax base had been put into the original law.
You mean the forest crop law?
No, this cigarette.
Oh, yeah, right.
Cigarette
I'm with you now. Right.
Then if somebody says, I'm not getting quite enough, still we're paying you. Don't you see what I mean? But they hit the legislature in such a massive group when there wasn't any tax that they gigged the legislature and paying 30 cents an acre. Mm-hmm. And that's way too high up here on out of this wild land. Because it isn't going to produce anything, some of it, for years.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well,
that's part of the economics of this thing. Do you see what I mean?
Right.
That's what I'm writing in, and you can take one of those with you.
Yeah, I'll have to take one of those. Yeah. Well, but
now don't get me wrong. The state has got to acquire some of these key if we're going to have some of this stuff.
Right.
But they can't avoid this idea of not paying taxes.
Right. Well, yeah, I go along with you there. What I was going to ask you is that you say the state has got to do this, to purchase some of this land or forest or whatever it might be. You still feel that your county and local levels are just not interested in it, or just they're not willing to do this? It has to be a state function?
Well, we're going to experiment, I guess, if they can put some of this so-called bounty money and see what the counties will do. The point of it is, a lot of these northern counties had millions of tax delinquent land, and they didn't do anything with it. at all until the state stepped in and did something.
Well, this is kind of indicative of the county on their county board system, and when you're trying to develop the fire protection districts back in the 20s and 30s, that
That's exactly
they
right.
had no interest in it,
Not a bit.
and they were even
But when the state finally took it over, they bucked like the dickens.
right.
There's too much authority.
No, I mean, this is what I want to determine. I agree with you personally that the state has got to intervene here more, because it's obvious that the county and local levels are just not going to
Trees are in
carry
the
the
way.
law.
The trees are in the way and they can't see the wood
Yeah,
at the
that's
county
right.
level.
Okay, we'll go on to something else here maybe a little bit. In 1931, the legislature had the Conservation Commission establish seasons on birds, upland birds, and then they established seasons on game, fur, and fish a little later in 33.
Yeah, that's right.
How did this operate in terms of what the Conservation Department did, and who they cooperate with? Who was their advisory group, and what, in
Well,
regards to establishing what seasons or what limits?
That was an evolutionary process. I don't know how many states where a commission, there weren't very many commissions there in those days, had the authority to set seasons and bag limits. I think Bill Aberg brought that into focus pretty good, so I won't comment too much on it. But this advisory business was an evolutionary thing. And this is my version of it. When the commission was, when the law was passed, they had to compromise that the governor would sign those, you know. And I think Bill said that's a fact. They never got it passed. But Bill wasn't on the commission then. But immediately afterwards, Emma of all people, and Goodman to a degree, I think, said, in effect, but if we don't give the people an opportunity to be heard, we won't have this authority very long. We can't keep this within 6 men and dictate to the whole state without, well, even letting off steam. You see what I mean? Now, Mac couldn't see that.
Thanks. Go ahead. You're talking about what Goodman and Emmel said in regards to making hearings available, or
so in conference with Mack and Grimmer, they first conceived area meetings. I mean, to give the people an opportunity. And one of the first I remember was up at Phillips, of where everybody was brought in that wanted to. I mean, there was a lot of notice given, and Emil ramrodded it.
these are public hearings.
Yeah. Then they broke that down, I think the next year, for 2 years. And I conducted hearings at Hayward and some of the other field personnel at, at other strategic points. I think at Hayward maybe 5 or 6 counties came in. And then Bill Grimmer conceived the idea that why not they didn't call it a Congress then, but that's what it was. Why not have these people elect representatives and bring them to Madison?
I mean, county would elect representatives.
That's right.
Right.
And so out of that, Mac was quite a guy to develop an idea, and so it would work. Don't you see?
Mm-hmm.
Bill, it was, in my opinion, it was Bill's idea that this would be a good thing. But Mac could immediately see that it involved a lot of actual detail to make it work, and he got busy on it. And so out of that evolved the Conservation Congress, which I'm pretty sure met for the first time in 1935.
That's right.
In one of the schoolhouses. I believe it was the vocational school down there. And then from then on, they began to develop the districts and the council and draw up more or less certain types of procedure and all of that. Mm-hmm. But now they had a meeting, they had an anniversary down here, and last spring of the Congress, and young Kenny Bacon wrote up a history of it. And Mac said it wasn't factual, this was evolved for pheasant distribution. But I absolutely disagree with him, because I can remember hearing him expound on the danger of losing everything they'd gained if you didn't give people an opportunity to be heard. And he was absolutely sound in that. And if you ever go out there, you raise that question with him, because I think he's the man that visualized. You see, before they went to their legislature, and if the commission took this authority by itself without consulting anybody, they would have screamed so that he was right. That whole authority would have been taken away from him. He could see that the democratic processes had to be worked with, even if people just came down there and blew off steam and criticized, they feel better when they go home, even if they don't get everything they want. Basically, the Congress wasn't such a mastermind of sound or setting sound regulations as it was educational. The first few years that they came down there, each county came down, and by God, they weren't going to give an inch, not even with their neighboring county. They wanted so many days for this, and they wanted at such a time. This neighboring county wanted so many days for that. It didn't coincide, the third county, and they found out, by God, that they weren't that there was other people to consider. And then after I got to be director, we got these study committees in, so that we paid their expenses, and these fellows would meet with the various division chiefs, whether it was enforcement or game or fish, and go over a lot of the type of techniques and management that the department was trying to evolve that you couldn't spend the time on a 2-day meeting. And it wasn't a brainwashing, it was just they could disagree, but this is the way we do it, you see?
Well, actually,
it was educational, in my opinion, and that's still what it should be.
Well, actually, the name that was given, or the capacity of the Conservation Congress and these committees, it was set up as an advisory group, and this was kind of a misnomer, isn't it?
That's right.
As they gained more experience in this, they probably became more in advisory capacity, but it was more of an educational operation.
That's right. Yeah, they are strict. Some of them even don't know that they're advisory.
Well, was there opposition on the commission and in the department to the idea of letting outsiders come in and help us make policies, or was there any?
Some among the fieldmen, yes, to start with, they were antagonistic.
Fieldmen, you mean wardens, rangers, this type of?
That's
wardens
right.
Primarily.
That's right. And then some of them were so short-sighted that they thought that if there was going to be a committee from each county, they should appoint it, and that had to be fought down internally. But this was an
election. They should appoint it.
Yeah, but at the main office, we were determined that this should be an elective process.
This was county election type.
Yeah, that's right.
Each county had what? One representative?
No, they've got 3, and they're staggered for 3 years, but one goes off every year. So there's 2, and then there's 2 alternates in case one of these fellas can't come down there.
Are there any qualifications for these people, or on the county level? They have to certain experience in the field or anything like this?
Mm-hmm. That would have been an impossible thing.
Yeah, at that time. Well, you think that the development of this idea of the Conservation Congress did a lot to soften public opinion towards law enforcement?
Definitely. Especially towards game management, because that was a new thing at that time. And some of them had built-in antagonisms. They didn't know what they were, but they were just against it.
Then, with the development of this Conservation Congress, you might say that the wardens and rangers became better than second-class citizens in the mind of the public.
Very definitely. That's right.
Facilitated the work a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, you think, I don't know what I asked here. Considerable progress has been made since 28 up till present day, I think, in game management. Do you think it has been as rapid as it could be, or is this an academic question, you might say?
Well, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's forestry, or whether it's game or fish, it's the role of the department definitely to lead. At the same time, they can't get too far ahead of their constituents, or they become irrealistic. If they don't lead, the people aren't going to go any place. They're going off in a lot of misdirections on their own ideas. And it's a case of leadership, giving them an opportunity to evaluate some of these new ideas as they progress and think them over. People do not want to be pushed into things. But I've also found out that if you will sow some seeds and let out an idea, people get a chance to think them over. The first thing you know, they'll be coming to you. They'll think they're their own idea. They'll ask you why you're not putting them into operation.
Right. Well, this kind of goes along with another question I had down here. Do you think that conservation in any area, conservation education in this state, that is provided for by law in our educational structure, universities, so on, do you think this is lagging, or do you think the idea is yet to really catch on?
Well, when that law was first passed, there was a terrific antagonism in the office of the Department of Public Instruction.
What law was that? Could you...
Well, there is a law that...
date, roughly?
Oh, God, it's in the late 30s, I believe.
Yeah.
Might have been the early 40s, of where... I can't specifically quote it now, whether it's conservation has got to be taught in the schools or the teachers in the teaching colleges have got to.
I know.
But there is such a law. But because it caught on to the fancy of the public and was passed, the Department of Public Instruction resisted it to beat hell. But I don't know how much good that law has done. I think it's done some good, but I do say that the matter of conservation in the schools now has improved terrifically. And you'll find it in the oddest places. It might be some country school where you go and you'll just be astonished, because that particular teacher has an interest. Now some other teacher, even though this law is in effect, may just reluctantly teach the minimums or vague, This other teacher is really leading her children.
Going overboard.
But they have gotten over this idea that conservation is pretty much at least, is a specific subject. In other words, land use possibly should go into geography. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean? It should be built into biology and pathology and anything that they're taking up that might have some relation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can ask you another question here, somewhat in regards to conservation education or progress that's been made in the state. Do you think that the commission form that was established, as it was established in 27, do you think that this is adequate? Do you think this is the right system that should be developed for education and conservation, so to speak, or progress in conservation?
Well,
is there any other type of a system that could be developed, do you think?
Well, I've seen practically all of them, and no system is perfect. And any system is only good in relation to the quality of people that are involved. And I've seen good commissions and some that I didn't think were so good. Right here in Wisconsin, Leopold was the man that evolved this philosophy, and Bill Aber put it into in the legal language. It's staggered, which has an advantage for the people that are on the commission. They have far greater authority and latitude than if you've got one commissioner, we'll say, that's appointed by the governor, and he only resides there at the pleasure of the governor. I don't believe a conservation commission can function personally. It's going to be at the beck and call of every new governor that comes in. You know what I mean? His pleasure or displeasure.
I think it's still too much tainted with politics.
You're damned right I do.
What would be
And I want you to impress with you the idea that none of these democratic processes are perfect either.
Oh, this is true.
By a heck of a way. They're not perfect. But, now one of the things, for example, in my opinion, that Guido Rahr did for the commission, they might have bogged down. There began to be a clamor that 6 unpaid men didn't have the time. Well, when I was director, the commission would take up every item, and there was a lot of items that personally I felt had been administrative, but it was traditional that the commission handle them, and that was during a time when they didn't have such a big department, you see.
Items such as what? I mean, just as an example, maybe.
When I first became, up to the time that I became director, every warden that was appointed was personally came before the commission was interrogated, and they determined. He came off of the personnel role, but if I recommended him, that wasn't. They had to do the determining. Do you see what I mean? Even down to the warden or the ranger and all that. And I maintained that the director should have the prerogative of that appointment after those names came off of the personnel list up to a division chief. I'd settle for them looking over division chief. But I thought that if a man can run an outfit that big, then he ought to be able to
pick his men.
Pick some men that are qualified. Because basically you pick men that can do a job. They keep you up. They're the ones that don't get you into trouble if they can do a job. It doesn't matter personally liking them or one fellow more than the other. It's the guy that can do the job. Well, when this cigarette tax business came in, or just before it possibly, I think it was before it, but it really showed up. Guido Rahr broke the commission down into committees of two. A committee was 2 people because there's only 6, 3 committees. And they, one took up forestry and parks and land acquisition. Another took up game, I guess, and another, or fish, I guess, another game and enforcement. I just can't quite. Yeah. But for half a day, these 2 men hold hearings, anybody, or with the department people, and anybody that wants to come in and talk, you see, of the public. Then when they come to their final meeting in the afternoons generally, or after all of these hearings are over, the chairman of this committee reports, if there's anybody in the public that wants to be heard or raise an objection, or if a commissioner wants to raise an objection, it will go over at the next commission meeting. Do you see what I mean? Otherwise, it's passed. Mm-hmm. But prior to that time, the 6 men listened to all of that stuff. Do you see? So he speeded it up just terrifically by that method. And I'm afraid with the volume of business they got, they would have bogged down until some other form of, regardless of where Guido's sympathies fit on a lot of things, he had been in big business and he knew that there are certain ways to function. And as the volume increases, then you've got to streamline it. And I actually think that Charlie Smith was involved too. Charlie had that idea, I guess, as much as Guido, but the two of them at least, I think they saved the commission system myself, though. So.
You could have, huh?
I really do.
Well, you think it's, I mean, by that I take it you mean that this is the best system applicable. It can be used here in Wisconsin. It should be.
Oh, I think so. I've seen the commission system in Minnesota. I've seen the commissioner system, where there's one commissioner. I've seen it in Dakota, where he sits there at the pleasure of the governor. Out in California, they've got a commission, and the governor appoints the director, and he's subject to the dictates of the governor and two other commissions besides his own. I mean, the farther you go, when you get away from home, you can find involvements that you sure don't want.
Right.
And actually, this is about the only commission that I know of which held its original status in law without being drastically changed since 1927 in the whole United States.
But it's still a little bit too tainted with politics.
That's a matter of that's part of your democratic processes, and the governors that appoint these fellows can make it political or they can make it non-political. But here's the other side of the coin. If they were all dictates of the governor, and then they were thrown off when the new governor come in and started over again like they do in Illinois, you wouldn't have, you see, continuity is a very important thing, even though you don't go too fast sometimes. And even though you get tainted with politics, the degree of taint isn't there if you can have some continuity.
Right. But in view of your experiences, you think that some of our problems in conservation in this state are being settled more from the political standpoint than the point of scientific approach to the matters? Would you?
Oh, yes and no. Some of them are from a political standpoint. On the other hand, this matter of scientific approach, there again is where the department has got to sell their idea to the people. Because I've seen, well, here, I'll give you a little example. Maybe this will answer your question. Some fishermen came in one time on a job that I had put them on, and that was a research job of 4 years. And they came in with their findings. Of course, I kept track of it. I talked to them, but this was the final. And this was their findings. And I thought they'd done a good job, and I agreed with them. Well, one of them said, "Now we're ready to go to work. We'll put this in effect." No, I said, "I don't think you will." Well, he said, "What's the use of doing all this work if we can't jump right into it?" I said, "Listen, it took you 4 years to find this. Now let's give the public a little time to catch up, because in 6 months you'll be fighting a rear guard action, a justification. And the first thing you know, we'll be talking about everything else but what you researched." So I said, "We can spend even a year better. This thing can be written up in the bulletin. It can be talked about among the personnel at area meetings. It can be talked about at these Rod and Gun Club meetings. Let the people begin to absorb it." Because I'd had too darn much experience of where you jump into something. Sure, it may be right, but if the people won't accept it, and I've had young game and fish managers behind my back say that I was chicken. But you can get into a brawl where it's just destructive.
Well, the scientific approach to questions has a place.
Oh, absolutely.
A big part of it.
I wouldn't argue that.
But it can't come too soon. I mean, it's got to...
That's where the leadership comes. After you've found out that this is what you think should be done through research, then leadership should disseminate this so that there's a reasonable acceptance of it, because after all, those are the guys that pay the bill, and they can wreck you.
Well, we go back to this idea of, this is somewhat related. I've got here, what is your opinion about the future for the scientific approach as represented by game managers, biologists, things like this, as opposed to a practical experience as represented by wardens and rangers and fish hatchery operators and things such as this? I mean, there has to be an integration of the two.
Absolutely.
One should not dominate. Is that, am I right or wrong there, you think?
Well, I tell you, maybe this doesn't answer your question, but when I was director, I had area boards of the supervisors of forest protection, law enforcement, game management, and fish management. There was 5 of them. And I made those fellows meet once a month. And each one of them gave a prospectus of his job and objectives. And if he needed coordinated help, do you see what I mean? I tried to develop those fellows into a stature of where they could go ahead. If it was a game management job, the game manager led the parade and the others helped him out. If it was a law enforcement job, the law enforcement supervisor led the parade and they cooperated. If it was a forestry job, he led the parade and those other. But I wanted them to grow up a little. Do you see what I mean? And if it was the game manager and a thing had been researched, but there were certain practical applications that these others could contribute, that's where they came in. But he determined, don't you see, how and when and why they participated. But each to his own specialty. And another thing, that type of coordination reduces manpower and payrolls a hell of a lot. And it isn't done enough in this department today. They abolished those, not just because I started it, but they abolished those area boards, and I think that was a damn bad mistake. Because too many of these fellows go off in their own private direction, and they don't know what the other fellow is aiming at or anything. I constantly told these fellows that they're a conservationist first, and they're a warden or a forester or a game manager second.
That's the way you should look at it.
That's right. But they don't, too many of them.
Oh boy. Because Austin, in 1935 you came to Madison and you were in what capacity at that time?
I was an assistant to Bill Grimmer.
And that's in game division.
In game division. And then in the fall of 35, through the Bureau of Personnel, I was appointed as deputy director to Director McKenzie. Now, there was many specialized jobs that he wanted investigated, and in some respects, I was an investigator, you might say, for him for some period of time. But on the other hand, it was a good education in public relations, because I had been promoted over the heads of some of the people that I had worked for, and certainly a lot of them I'd worked with. And this idea of doing the job you're supposed to do and keeping their goodwill was, as I say, quite a job of public relations. You see, I'd worked for Harrington. And then I worked for Bill.
Was there, in terms of opposition, was there any great opposition to this move, or wasn't much they could do about it because of Bureau personnel?
Well, of course, the commission approved it, and the Bureau of Personnel. Well, actually, I don't think that very many people had any idea that I was going to be the guy that was going to be appointed. Until it happened.
Until it happened, huh? Yeah.
But I think one of the things that helped me was it wasn't altogether Mac's idea of breaking me in that way, but he had a lot of things that he wanted reports on. It wasn't a case of anything bad, but I had a lot of field experience, and I'd had experience in forest protection, and he wanted observations.
That was my next question. What were your duties as deputy director? I mean,
well, normally, of course, when he was gone, I ran the department for him, but I spent an awful lot of time in the field on matters of upgrading efficiency and things of that nature, going out and seeing just how things are operating. Then, this was at the time that the commission was granted the authority, about that time, a little before that, to draft fish and game regulations, and I was given the job of writing those, and that was a pioneering effort. So I had a lot of contacts with the Attorney General's office and trying to figure out how those things should be drafted and make them effective and all that sort of thing. So many of those things are just matter of routine today, but they were all new then. In fact, I wrote a manual on how to run the Congress, just so that it was things that the commission had stated they wanted, and things that had gone into practice. It was a matter of putting them down so that, well, here they are. This is the way it's run.
You mean you didn't feel that the Conservation Congress was as effective as it could be?
That's right.
The commission felt it, or you felt it too, obviously, but through you issued this pamphlet. What were some of the inadequacies, you might say, of the Congress that led
well, in the first place, when you see, after the Congress was established from the standpoint of these county hearings and county committees, some of these field men that conducted them didn't have any experience on conducting a meeting. They didn't know what their authority should be. They didn't know just how these committeemen should be elected. And you had to spell a lot of those things out. You see what I mean? And then somebody say, "Do we get paid going down there?" Well, maybe this fellow hadn't paid too much attention to it and decided, well, I don't know whether you do or not. It was all in there so that he could answer all the anticipated questions. And then it went on to describe just how the meeting should be run in Madison.
Meaning of the Congress? Or?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Kind of rules of order, more or less.
That's right, yeah.
Well, it's just administrative operations, or
that's
should
what
be
it
done,
was.
just designed to facilitate.
And in the absence of that, some gink would jump up and say, well, that isn't the Robert Rules of Order, don't you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can get into more complications if you don't have a little something as a guideline, you know.
Yeah, this is true. This is true.
Any part of it was.
Well, this concludes this session or this interview with Mr. Swift at this time. We'll try to work another one in at some later date. And this was the end of the interview on November 23rd, 1964.